So folks, my name is Iolani Gutierrez. I'm the education coordinator here at Iolani Palace, and I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Lorenz Gonschor. Dr. Gonschor obtained his master's degree in Pacific Island Studies in 2008 from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and he received his PhD in political science in 2016 from the same institution. Since 2017, he has been a senior lecturer and associate dean at ʻAtenisi University in Tonga. His research interests include historical and contemporary governance and politics of Oceania, with a special focus on the international relations of the Hawaiian Kingdom and its role in Pacific regionalism. His first book, A Power in the World, The Hawaiian Kingdom in Oceania, is forthcoming with the University of Hawaii Press and scheduled for release in 2019. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lorenz Gonschor.
So thank you, Iolani, for introducing me, and thanks to the Friends of Iolani Palace for hosting me tonight. Thanks to the Executive Director, Kippen de Albachu, who is in the audience. Thank you for, and of course, everybody else, all the staff members who were involved here setting this up for me. I mean, you know, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, so my talk today is about the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania. So what I'm going to do is, so first I used a ʻōlelo no ʻeau for a very specific reason to entitle my talk. So this ʻōlelo no ʻeau kauka ʻiwa he la makani. It means the ʻiwa bird is standing high up the sky. I mean, the ʻiwa bird is high up in the. If the ʻiwa bird is up in the sky, it will be a windy day. So it's one of, like many of these ʻōlelo no ʻeau. It has many layers of kauna, and one of those layers is that it was actually used in, and I'll get to there later in the presentation, to describe the position of the Hawaiian Kingdom in Oceania in the late 19th century, and it was actually part of a newspaper editorial. And so I think in a way it is really this ʻōlelo no ʻeau really epitomizes this situation that the Hawaiian Kingdom found itself in the late 19th century, and this royal order was kind of in a similar way, like in a different way, but essentially expressing the same thing, namely Hawaii's status in Oceania. So that's why I choose this. Now, my presentation will consist of 3 parts. I will first give a short overview of the history of royal orders in general, because a lot of people here today in Hawaii are not too familiar, because you know how this actually, what these royal orders actually are and what they symbolize and how many there are and all this. So I'll give a short introduction about the history of royal orders and specifically the Hawaiian orders. Secondly, I will give a historic overview of how Hawaii saw its position in Oceania, how that evolved, how Hawaii's position in the Pacific during the 19th century. And then last, I will just give a description of the royal order, of the physical description and also the membership. Pretty much all that I have found out in my research. And of course, like everything else, I don't claim to be an authority on this. I'm just, I'm doing research, I'm finding things. So we will have a question and answer and also comment section. If any one of you has things that they might contribute that I might have missed, then please be welcome to do so later in the Q&A session after the presentation, okay? So my first part, the history of royal orders in the world and in Hawaii. So first of all, we need to have a little understanding of these royal orders. And most of you are familiar, you've seen them in the galleries, but what's the actual history? Where does this come from to have these little crosses and whatever as royal symbols? So essentially the history goes back to the Crusades, the early Middle Ages, when there were these orders. So an order is actually an order. Just the term order. An order is a religious order. It's essentially a monkhood in the Catholic Church, right? All the way since, shortly after Christ. Now, in the Crusades, we had for the first time, we had monks, like religious people who went into kind of a military formation in order to conquer the Middle East, essentially, from the Muslims. So then we had not just orders, but we had military orders, or orders of chivalry, like meaning orders of knights. So these people were essentially, they were monks and knights at the same time. They were these guys, conquering the Middle East for a while. And so there were several of these orders. One of them was the Knights Templar. I have just one of these, historical not original pictures from that time, but I was just Googling Knights Templar, so nothing really special here. And then there were others. There was the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. There was then the Knights of Malta later. Then there was the Teutonic Knights. So several of these orders. So that's essentially where it came from. And part of their symbolism was that they had these cross symbols on their armor, and also they wore badges with those crosses. So, and that's really the origin of all of this. Now, later in the Middle Ages in Europe, we had royal orders when kings of these European nations, they would create these national orders of knighthood in order to kind of honor their own, in this feudal system, to honor, to give kind of honors to their dependents, to the lords that would be under them. And so there's a few examples of those. One, the most important of those ones, one of the really old ones that's still around, is the Order of the Garter, that's the highest order of the British Empire. And here you see Queen Elizabeth for one of these investiture ceremonies for the Order of the Garter in that garb. That's actually how the cross of it looks like. So this one is still around, but it was created in 1348. Now France created another quite important one. The Order of St. Louis was created under Louis XIV in France. That's kind of the big national royal order of France. And then later in the modern age, we had when after the French Revolution, countries in Europe became more and more secular and kind of more like they moved away from this concept of either a feudal monarchy or from this religious concept. And they created, still based on this ancient model, they created national orders of merit. And the first one, really the prototype for this, is the Legion of Honor that Napoleon of France created in 1802, and that's what you see here at the very far right. So that's another one of those. And now you have to see, like in the 19th century, that's essentially how Western monarchies and even non-monarchies would communicate with each other by awarding each other these kinds of orders, and awarding these orders both as orders of merits for their own citizens and also in between diplomats. And so this is, in this setting, then the Hawaiian Kingdom, trying to model itself after essentially a European monarchy, then kind of copied this concept of royal orders and created its own national royal orders. And so on our next slide, we will have just an overview. There were altogether 7 royal Hawaiian orders in the 19th century. Some of them are well known. Two of them are not really that well known, so I will just present all of them here real quickly. So the first one was the Order of the Cross and Crown. That one was actually created by royal decree in 1848. So this is the first royal order. Now, the one problem with it is it was never awarded because there was King Kauikeaʻuli. He created it, but then he felt kind of had mixed feelings about it and never actually awarded it to anybody. Now, we also don't know exactly how the insignia, like the symbols of this order, might have looked like. I suspect that it was that this order, because there are several pictures of Kauikeaʻuli that shows him with this kind of, it's not very detailed, because even if you zoom in on these paintings, you don't really see that much details on it. But it is a kind of an 8-pointed star with a red center and then on this kind of red ribbon. So likely, and I'm not aware of Kauikeaʻuli having received any foreign order from any other country, so I assume this is probably the Order of the Crown and Cross, but it was never awarded to anybody else. So that is somewhat hypothetical, and I have to do more research, and hope maybe somebody else will do some more research about this, or the exact nature of that order. But all I know is that this is in the history of Hawaiian orders, this is the first one. Now, the second one, that's another one that's really not well known, is the Order of Arossi. That's one that I will actually have a whole slide and tell you more about it because it has to do with the genealogy leading to the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania. So I'll just put that on hold for now, just to have it here in the list. Now then we have the 5 ones that are actually the ones that are most well known, and each of the following 5 ones, if you get a chance to visit the Iolani Palace galleries downstairs, you will see insignia of all of these 4. All of these 5. And then so then number 3 would be the Order of Kamehameha, founded in 1865 by Kamehameha V. So that's kind of that's how it looks like. It has the K in the center, a blue circle around it that says Eho o Kanaka, and then the Maltese cross. So it's obviously influenced to some extent by the Legion of Honor design of France, I think. and several other European orders probably. The Hawaiian crown on top of it. Note that the Hawaiian crown is not like a European crown. It has special elements. It has spikes that actually have the form of kalo leaves. These are spikes that are, I mean, they're ordered like a European crown, but they're actually, with them in detail, they're actually leaves of kalo. Number 4 is the Order of Kalakaua. Kalakaua is the monarch, the one single monarch who created, well, more orders than anybody else. He created 4 new orders. And the first one he created was in 1875, right 1 year after his being elected to the throne. He created the Order of Kalakaua after himself. That's actually the first one. It has explicit Hawaiian cultural symbolism in it because it still retains this kind of Maltese cross, but there's 4 pulo'ulo'u here, these, the sticks with the kapa ball, and then there is a kahili in the center. So it's very kind of, it's much more culturally symbolically Hawaiian than the other one. And then it says Kalakaua and the election of the date of his election, February, forgot which exact date it was, 12th, I think, February 12th, 1874. Okay, so this is the second one. I mean, this is the number 4. Then number 5, again, King Kalakaua, a few years later, in 1880, he created the Order of Kapi'olani. That is actually explicitly not named after his wife Kapi'olani, but after Kapi'olani the Great, that chiefess who was on Hawaii Island, one of these early Christian converts who defied Pele by throwing stuff into the crater that she shouldn't have thrown in there, and then therefore kind of demonstrating to the missionaries how she was actually a convert and would no longer believe in Pele. So it's that lady, Kapi'olani the Great, who is pictured here, and she's also obviously the person that Kapi'olani, wife of Kalakaua, is named after. So of course it has kind of a double. It also honors Kalakaua's wife through that, and it was actually awarded to. It has the highest number of female members who it was awarded to. So it definitely had some close connection to the queen and to the female side of the royal family. Now the 6th one is then the Order of the Crown of Hawaii. That one was created in 1882. In a way to actually to honor King Kalakaua's coronation that would happen the year after that. And that one is interesting. The design is a little different from the other ones because this is actually based on the Iron Cross, which is a German Prussian symbol. So it's actually directly modeled after the Prussian Order of the Crown of Prussia. And I mean, so it's very easy to get them mixed up because the Prussian Order of the Crown kind of looks almost the same thing. And the only detail is that this is the specific Hawaiian crown with the kalo leaves and everything, whereas in Prussia the crown is different. But other than that, then it says Hawaii ke kalaunu, Hawaii the crown. So that's the 6th one. And then of course we have the 7th one, which is the one really the topic of our talk. And this one also I skip for now because we all go into much more detail in describing that one, the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania. Okay, now something about the importance of these orders and what they were used for diplomacy. So essentially in the 19th century, these orders are increasingly awarded not just to citizens of the country itself, but also to foreign heads of state and foreign diplomats, essentially in order to kind of as a token of friendly relations, to underline the friendship, like kind of as a gift in a way, honor each other, giving these orders to each other. And so, for example, King Kalakaua, this is one of the famous photographs of him, and here you really see this. So he is wearing the Grand Crosses, which is the highest rank, for 4 Hawaiian orders. Here's the Order of the Crown. I think, I'm not sure. This picture is not good, but I actually looked at the thing in detail, and I could. So I think one must be the Order of Kapi'olani, one is the Order of Kalakaua. He also wears both the Order of Kamehameha and the Order of Kalakaua as a kind of as a collar here. But then the foreign ones, he wears the Grand Cross of the Order of the Chrysanthemum from Japan that Emperor Meiji gave him. Then again, this is so 1, 2, 3. These other ones, and I'm not sure which one is which right now here, but one of them is the highest order of the UK. One of the highest orders, not the Garter, but the other one, the Order of St. Michael and St. George from Russia, from the UK. Then the Order of, I think, St. Stanislas from Russia. and the other one is the Order of the Black Eagle from Germany, from Imperial Germany. So these are like the highest. So we already see, like, when he went on his trip around the world, he met all these European emperors and well, most of them, not the Tsar of Russia, but he communicated with him too. So he met all these foreign royalty or had other relations, and then they would like reciprocate these orders to each other. And so if one example is that the highest possible rank in all of Hawaii, well, yeah, I forgot the second point here. There was an international ranking system. They would actually publish handbooks. They're pretty thick books with like hundreds of pages that would list all the royal orders of each, or Republican too, all the orders of each country in the world, and then give them like the rank. So then, for example, King Kalakaua was awarded like a Grand Cross of the Order of St. Stanislaus. Well, he didn't know what that is, right? So he would have his chamberlain look it up in that handbook and see, okay, this is rank so and so, and this then would correspond to, let's say, the Grand Cross of the Royal Order of Kamehameha, for example, right? And so in that sense, these highest rank, the highest possible rank that the King of Hawaii could award is the Grand Cross of the Order of Kamehameha I, the one that Kamehameha V founded in 65, but not just the Grand Cross, but actually the Grand Cross on a golden collar, and that's this one. And this was just awarded to 4 heads of state: Queen Victoria, the Tsar of Russia, a Meiji Emperor of Japan, and then the Tsar of Russia, and then President Jules Grévy of the French Republic. And because the French are Republican and they don't have a monarchy and they are kind of disorganized and whatever, they didn't keep this in their collection, but they actually sold it on the market at one point after that. Which is in a way good for the Friends of Iolani Palace, but because you guys were able to buy it at auction, and this is now in the basement in the galleries of Iolani Palace. So if you guys, do a tour of the palace next time, please check that out. And this is right there. It's actually a picture I took in the galleries there. So just to give you an example of these kind of head of state level of order exchange. But these Hawaiian diplomats, if they went around the world, they would also receive not only Hawaiian orders for their service to the country as kind of a national service awards, but they would also then be given orders by their hosts, and then they would reciprocate them by having, in the name of King Kalakaua, giving their hosts kind of equivalent orders. So, for example, here you see Curtis Iokea, and don't ask me all the details because I'm still trying to figure out some of them. That these black and white pictures are sometimes really hard to identify, especially the foreign ones that I don't know. But so here he has like two grades of the Order of the Rising Sun from Japan. That's kind of very characteristic. He also wears the Hawaiian Order of the Crown here. This is another foreign order that I'm not. No, I think this is actually the Legion of Honor, because he got that, because the Legion of Honor has 5, or it doesn't have a cross, but it has actually 5 wings. So I think that's the Legion of Honor. And then this one, I'm not sure. It must be either a, what else? Yeah, there's probably the Russian. That's probably the Russian order here that he's wearing. So there you see like an example of that. And then there's another famous Hawaiian diplomat, John Makini Kapena, who also went to Japan. Iokea went all around the world. He visited 20 countries or so. But Kapena went specifically to Japan to get try to negotiate the migration treaty, and also to try to equalize relations between Japan and Hawaii at the time. And so he also wears, as you can see, he has several Hawaiian orders here. Definitely that is, I think, Order of Kalakaua. Also the Japanese Order of the Rising Sun, and then again several other ones that I haven't identified, because this picture is actually not even a good. It's like a super, like it's not a good quality, so it's hard to figure them all out. But so just to give you examples of how these orders were actually used and what's kind of the importance. I mean, besides just being beautiful little jewels that you see in these glass cases today, but actually just get a sense of what the purpose of these orders was in the 19th century. Okay, now we come to our second part of our presentation here, and that is the Hawaiian policy that actually led to the creation of this last one, the very last one, the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania. So let me first start with, so obviously Star of Oceania has to do with Oceania, meaning the Pacific Islands, right? Hawaii is, after all, not in Europe, not in the American continent, but it is in Oceania in the Pacific, right? So very early on, from about the 1850s, Hawaii. So first of all, I mean, for those who don't know, the Hawaiian Kingdom had over 100 consulates and embassies. Well, they didn't call them embassies at the time. They called them legations, which is what today would be an embassy, and consulates, which today still would be consulates, all over the world. So I mean, almost every major city in the world had at one point a Hawaiian consulate. You know, go any medium city in the U.S., whatever, St. Louis, New Orleans, you got a Hawaiian consul there. Or go to Glasgow in Scotland, go to whatever, Liverpool, like all of them, there were Hawaiian consuls everywhere. So the Hawaiian diplomatic network was really like encompassing the entire world. Now, in the Pacific Islands, that is true as well. From the 1850s onwards, they had Hawaiian consuls in many of the major Pacific Islands. I'm just having a few of these letterheads or stamps, stamps from different letters here that I came across in my archival research. So here, this is a Hawaiian. Some of them are hard to read because the wax seals especially. So this is Kanikele Hawaii Ma Auckland, Hawaiian consulate in Auckland, right, New Zealand. This one is actually the original, like the stamp thing itself. So it's obviously inverse print. So it says Kanikele Hawaii Ma Fiji, right, Hawaiian consulate Fiji. Then we have one here, Hawaiian consul, Hawaiian commission for Polynesia. There was one, I'll get to that in a second who that was. It was a very, very specific Hawaiian diplomat who was actually the head diplomat for all of the Pacific. And it is the same thing here, Hawaiian legation, Southern Polynesia. That's the kind of, in a way, in a more recent, somewhat later version of this one. So these were like for a position for Oceania at large. And then we have other one, this is Hawaiian consul in Samoa. Again, it's hard to read here, but it says Samoa. And then here, this is in French, because Tahiti was already under French influence from the 1840s, so it's in French here. Consulat du Royaume de Hawaii, Tahiti, Océanie, the consulate of the Hawaiian Kingdom in Tahiti, Oceania. And then this here, Hawaiian commercial agent. So commercial agents is actually, it's not really what it sounds. It's commercial agent sounds like something private business, but it's actually not. A commercial agent is the lowest rank in diplomacy. So even below a consul, you have a commercial agent, and it's still a government representing, like it's still a diplomat representing the government, but he has the name commercial agent because he's kind of lower than a consul. And then, so in Jaluit, Marshall Islands in Micronesia, Hawaii had a commercial agent. So even in like some of these really small islands in Micronesia, Hawaii was present at that time. And just to give you kind of a framework of kind of the infrastructure that Hawaii had in the Pacific Islands. Now, but it went much further than just having Hawaiian representatives in these islands. What Hawaii really was after, what the kingdom really wanted to do from the 1850s onwards, was to create kind of a political infrastructure to unify all these Oceanian islands into kind of some kind of supra entity, confederation, an empire, whatever you want to call it, but something that would federate all these small islands of Polynesia and maybe also what we today would call Micronesia. Because at that time they used Polynesia and Oceania kind of interchangeably. Polynesia could mean anything from New Guinea to wherever. So the names were not as precise as they are being used now. But the kind of a unification of all these islands of the Pacific has been a Hawaiian foreign policy goal since the 1850s, and the one who is actually in a way the original progenitor of this idea is this person, Charles St. Julian, who is ethnically not Hawaiian, but he was in Hawaii, like many others, in Hawaiian government service, one of the probably most loyal and most dedicated foreign officials for the Hawaiian Kingdom Foreign Ministry. So he was Hawaiian Consul General in Sydney for all of the Australian, at that time British Australian colonies, and also the commissioner to the independent chiefs and tribes of Polynesia. Might sound not that interesting, this terminology, but it's actually very, 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 very specific. These terms here, chiefs and tribes, it's actually what they're doing here is the Hawaiians are using the Western political system, the Western system of international law, and they're extending it. Because they're saying, well, look, we're not just recognizing states like Britain, France, whatever. No, we're actually doing this diplomacy the Western-style diplomacy, and we recognize these chiefs and tribes as equals, to countries like France and England and whatever. So there already you see this Hawaiian agency in trying to shape international diplomacy and making it kind of indigenous friendly, and taking it away from this kind of Western imperial standards here. So he was the commissioner to all these independent Polynesian islands, no matter how small they were. So essentially, then he published this official report of Central Polynesia. Again, it's one of these documents where you wonder today. I mean, this is probably one of the most important documents of kind of Pacific regional policy, probably the earliest policy paper on a unified Pacific. And it sits there's I think 2 copies in the state archives and 1 copy in the UH library, and I'm not aware of anybody having read it in the last 20 years, or has cited it in any academic paper. So, I mean, there's so much stuff out there from the kingdom and this is, you don't even need to learn Hawaiian to read this. This is actually in English because, he didn't speak Hawaiian. He was based there in Sydney. He wrote it in English, but nonetheless, it's like a really, really interesting policy paper. And so what he argues in that is that Hawaii, if Oceania was unified under Hawaiian leadership, and I'll just give you a few quotes just to tell you what kind of a vision this guy was, and how much the Hawaiian Kingdom officials were kind of how much self-confidence they had at that time. They were saying, so we would be this unified Oceania under Hawaiian leadership would be a power in the world. By the way, that's the title of my forthcoming book based on that. And it would also be, he said, it would not only be permanently independent, but powerful, this kind of pan-Pacific entity. And therefore, it would be able to speak with a voice imperial in the councils of the world. So these are kind of the words that you find in this document. So it's quite interesting. And at the same time, it's also very interesting. Hawaiian Kingdom has really been the pioneer of, I guess, the concept of self-determination, as we would call it today in the 20th century in the Pacific. Because there's a kind of really interesting anecdote here. I'll just share that very, very, very briefly here. So in the 1850s, St. Julian, there was a kind of interesting story. So St. Julian had a friend, British adventurer, who was just going around the Pacific and probably not the most scrupulous guy. He was doing kind of shady business deals, and like many of these guys. And he went to this atoll, Sikayana, that's a picture that was done at that time. And he somehow made the people of Sikayana to sign some kind of paper where he claims, based on that this atoll now belongs to him. So he has supposedly bought that atoll from the people. I highly doubt that the people of Sikayana were really aware of what they were signing, or whether they were really aware of anything. But nonetheless, this guy did, very typical thing that Western colonizers did at the time. Now, St. Julian, however, he kind of turned the whole thing around, because this guy this adventurer passed away, and St. Julian was his heir, because he had no other descendants. St. Julian, they were, I think, business partners at one point. So somehow St. Julian, the Hawaiian consul, ended up with owning this supposed claim on this atoll that was came together through these dubious circumstances. And now what did he do? He wrote to Kamehameha IV and say, look, I have this atoll, and I'm here to extend Hawaiian influence in the Pacific. That's my job as the Hawaiian Consul General. But I got this atoll here. So that's how, I give this to the Hawaiian Kingdom, and Hawaii now will have a colony overseas, right? It's 3,000 miles south of here. And Kamehameha IV then accepted that and said, yeah, well, that's wonderful, but we can't just take over these people because some Western guy had claimed to have bought the island. No, we actually have to go there, and we have to make these people vote on whether they want to become part of the Hawaiian Kingdom or not. Kamehameha IV sure would love them to be part of Hawaii, but he would have them vote, give them the choice. Now imagine, this is all in the 1850s, so I'm not aware of any country in the world, anybody ever raising this possibility, even remotely, that people should be able to vote on where their island should belong to. That's something that came with in the 20th century, the United Nations, and now we have decolonization committee that pushes for that, all of that. That's kind of 20th century things. But having in the 1850s, when all you had were empires conquering like native peoples and putting them under their rule, having somebody actually make the suggestion. It's like really, I mean, it's such an advanced kind of political thought that they had in Hawaii. So anyway, this is just wanted to show you that as an example of how progressive this policy of Hawaii was. So it was not really to expand and just conquering these islands the same way that European powers would have, but it was actually to create something based on the self-determination of each of these different Pacific island nations. So now in the case of Sikayana, the project did fail because at that time Kamehameha IV, Hawaii was still not that wealthy. They didn't really have a navy. They didn't really have they were all discussing this in Honolulu, and they were discussing it with their consul in Sydney, but they didn't have the means to actually get to this atoll, have these people vote, and then actually implement this policy. So eventually they kind of let it go and didn't really pursue it anymore. And probably the people of Sikayana never really knew what was going on with their island anyway during that time. But nonetheless, I think it's important to mention this because it really shows kind of the progressiveness of Hawaiian leadership at that time. Now, in this context, we have this Hawaiian Second Royal Order, which is very obscure. Most people in Hawaii even Hawaiian historians, I think most of them have no idea that this order even existed. So that's the so-called Order of Arossi. It was founded by Saint Julian himself in the mid-1850s. And now the name, so Arossi is an indigenous name of the island, which at that time was mainly called in Spanish San Cristobal. Today it's called Makira because in the Solomon Islands you have several, Melanesia is very diverse. You have different ethnic groups. So on one end of this island, the natives call the island Arossi. On the other end, they call it Makira. So for some reason, today they took the name of that other end of the island, how they call the island. But at that time, Saint Julian used the name that they use on that western end of the island, Arossi. And that was next to Sikayana, so because it had to do, there was another one of those questionable purchases that this friend, Ben Boyd, this friend of St. Julian had done, and St. Julian inherited, so he wanted to, again, use the name of this island in the Solomons for this Hawaiian Order of Merit that he created. So he created it when there was the statutes for the reward of those who have materially aided the social and political advancement of any Polynesian government or people. So again, you get this idea that not to colonize these islands, but to actually help them develop, and become something like similar to Hawaii, and then create this pan-Pacific entity. And then Kamehameha, so even though it was created as kind of as a private enterprise by St. Julian, just by himself personally, but then because he was the Hawaiian consul, he wrote back and forth to the government in Honolulu, Kamehameha IV, and then later the fifth. And then they accepted, so Kamehameha the fourth, I forgot here, it should be Kamehameha the fourth, the same one like before. I forgot the digits here. Kamehameha the fourth accepted sovereignty over this order in 1860. So in 1860, it actually did become the second Hawaiian, official royal order of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And now the thing is, I've never seen actually how the insignia itself, I've never seen one of those little metal things. The only thing is there's a wax seal that was being done that shows how it looks like. It was done on some of these official correspondences about awarding the order to people. And we have a picture of, because it was mainly to St. Julian's staff at the Hawaiian Consulate General who was awarded this order, not really too many other people. And for example, this guy, Edward Reeve, who then was St. Julian's assistant and later successor, there's a picture of him, and here you see in this little corner, he wears this little cross, So it's kind of a cross that has double crosses kind of at the ends of each cross. So that's how it looks like. And then it has a Latin motto. That was a common thing. Most of these royal orders had mottos in Latin at that time. Hawaii didn't do that really. Most of them were more in Hawaiian than in Latin, but in most things like the order of most of these European orders, they had their inscriptions usually in Latin. And this motto is quite interesting. Ne tentas aut perfice, which means don't try unless you want to go all the way. So it's kind of a nice, again, these guys were so full of self-confidence at that time, thinking that they could do like the Hawaiian, they could make the Hawaiian Kingdom kind of a big regional power by doing all of this stuff. And they were, making those kind of statements. So quite a nice thing to know. And now let's fast forward for a couple decades, 1880s, King Kalakaua's time. Now, as most of you probably know, if you have seen other presentations about King Kalakaua, you visited the palace. King Kalakaua was, he continued a lot of things that his predecessors had done, but in a way he was even more into this kind of Hawaiian nationalism, or you want to call it Hawaiian patriotism, cultural assertiveness than any of his predecessors. He was most instrumental in, as many of you are aware, certainly the revival of Hawaiian cultural practices, the revival of hula as unofficial state ceremonies. This is a picture from his coronation where they were dancing hula in public again, which because of missionary influence hadn't really happened for a long time. But what's important to understand is that King Kalakaua was not just this, we often get him, as the merry monarch who liked hula. I think that most people know that, but in this discourse, it often gets lost that he was not just a cultural revival advocate, but he was also, more than any of his predecessors, he really pushed for a really assertive Hawaiian foreign policy. Again, much more than any of the Hawaiian kings before him. And he had probably, again, more than any of the monarchs before him, even though, as I said already, the third, the fourth, and the fifth were, starting that with, the stories I just shared before. But definitely under King Kalakaua, it became kind of a kind of national Hawaiian policy to have this kind of sense of kuleana for all of Oceania. So that was definitely became part of the main component of Hawaiian foreign policy during his time. And I'll just give you a few examples here. So in 1883, King Kalakaua, who at that time was mainly advised by Walter Murray Gibson, another one of those haole political leaders in Hawaii who was actually was a patriot, was very much on the king's side. One thing I think we should never forget is that we should not go into this simple dichotomy, like there's the Hawaiians and there's the haulas, one the bad guy, the other one the good guy. It's always kind of more complicated during that time because we have obviously the enemies of the kingdom, the people who did the overthrow. These were, they were 99% haole, that's for sure. But there were many haole in the kingdom who were actually not like that at all, who were actually very much on the side of the kingdom and of the Hawaiian monarchs, and some of them actually actively promoting kind of these assertive native policies. And one of those I mentioned was St. Julian back in the 50s, and one of them in the 1880s during King Kalakaua's time was Walter Gibson. They issued a protest, actually signed by him because he was foreign minister, but certainly I think both of them has probably a hand in doing this. And in this protest, they were essentially, at that time, just like Africa and the Pacific Islands, the Western powers were kind of gobbling up one island after another. They were. It's always this saying. So there were these cigar-smoking gentlemen sitting in some office in Paris or London, and they were drawing They're drawing lines on maps, right? Essentially saying, "Oh, this goes to the French, this goes to the Germans, this goes to the the British, all of that." And right in the early 1880s, there was one of these big pushes where I think the Germans were starting to colonize the Marshall Islands. The British were in the Western Pacific. So there was really this colonization became more and more intense. And because of that, Hawaii really felt, both King Kalakaua and Gibson and many other, and the majority in the legislature, and essentially most people in Hawaii, they felt this has to stop. And so Hawaii sent this protest, and they sent it to all governments in the world. And it's essentially, I don't need to read the whole thing, but it says essentially that the Hawaiian Kingdom is one of the most progressive nations in the world. And these other islanders are Polynesians just like Hawaiians, and they could just do the same thing. Why don't we just let them develop modern nation states just like Hawaii? They can do as well as we. We'll help them a little bit as Hawaiians, but they will do the same thing. They will become modern nation states. They don't need this Western colonization because that was always the argument. These are primitive people who need the help, right, of Western civilization. And then so King Kalakaua and Gibson said, well, look, we have electric lights in our palace. We have streetcars. We have all of that. We're not colonized by anybody. Why would you say that the Maori need the British to do that to them? Why do the Germans say they need to go to Samoa to bring them quote unquote civilization? Well, they can just develop it just like we in Hawaii. We have built a palace and street lights and all of that. So that was essentially the argument here. And then and because Hawaii already has all of this, it has international recognition, it is part of the global network of diplomats. It has embassies everywhere. It is recognized. At that time, nobody threatened its independence. And so, so Hawaii therefore has kind of they didn't use the term kuleana, but they would have used it in Hawaiian, I'm sure. In the English, they said responsibility. We have the it's our mission of Hawaii, of the Hawaiian Kingdom, to essentially speak up for those people. And you Western powers, keep your hands off. This is not you guys part of the world. This is our part of the world, but not ours in the sense of we want to colonize them for Hawaii, but in the sense of we should lead all of them to unite and keep you guys out, you Western powers. No. Now, what's interesting is that this one, just a little anecdotes, because I, like some other historians here in the room, I guess, I spend most of my life, sitting in archives and reading documents and those kind of things. And sometimes it's really it might be boring for some people to think that kind of stuff, to do that kind of stuff, but. The most rewarding thing is always like if you find like one of these documents that you have kind of maybe from before, or maybe you have even never known it before, and you read something like this and you can touch it, and you know that this is what King Kalakaua actually signed, or this is what Gibson signed, so I went through the I think 4 European archives in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and in France. And in each of them, I saw a copy. So remember, there's no Xerox copying at the time, right? And then most of the paper from that time, it kind of crumbles because it's bad paper. Not this one. It was written on like thick paper. It looks like it was written like 10 years ago, maybe, but not 130 years ago. The ink must be some special ink because it didn't fade. It looks like it was written just, even like Walter Gibson's like signature, it looks like somebody had done this just a few years ago. So they used like the best possible paper in the world, the best possible ink in the world to write this and send it to all the governments of the world. So this is actually a bad copy. Because it's just black and white. You can't really see that quality, but just touching it and looking at it, it's just like it's an amazing kind of joyful experience to do that. All right, so until now we just have been kind of theoretical, because all of this is just writing, right? You write stuff and you send it, and you do this and that, and you discuss, and you write papers and you write books and whatever. Now in 86 to 87, again during Kalakaua's time, this whole thing became actually concrete, and they actually started implementing this policy. So in late 86, King Kalakaua sent a diplomatic embassy consisting of John Bush. Some of you might know John Bush because John Bush is the one who published one of the versions of the Hi'iaka Ikapoli Opele story in one of the newspapers, and he published quite a lot of other stories. He was really famous as a newspaper publisher. Noinoi Silva writes a lot about him among other people, and. But he was also a Hawaiian politician and a Hawaiian diplomat, which is what most people don't know. It's not that well known about him. So he was the Hawaiian ambassador, and then his secretary, Henry Poor, the one right next to him. So these were both Hapa, part Hawaiian, part Haole people. And then they were here on this picture. You see him with King Malietoa of Samoa, and then some Hawaiian Navy officers. And then, and they had the first ever Hawaiian warship, the HHMS Kaimiloa. And so all of this they were sent to Samoa in a sense to protect Samoa, because Samoa at that time was very fragile. It had elected its king. Malietoa is one of the title holders. They had elected him king, but it was kind of tenuous whether he would actually be able to kind of keep kind of a monarchy, kind of keep that together. And then these European powers were just standing there, like the like hungry wolves, waiting to kind of make their move. There was the Germans, the British, and the Americans. And so right in this middle, this kind of pretty weak government by Malietoa, and then the Hawaiians were sent there to essentially strengthen them and tell the world, implement this policy, tell the world off, like this is something that the Samoans should do themselves. We Hawaiians, because we're their cousins, we should help them, but you guys all get off. That's none of your business here. So that's essentially the point why they were sent there. And now they did in a way have success, because in February 1987, Malietoa and Bush signed a treaty of political confederation between Hawaii and Samoa. This is the original. Hard to find because it's actually misfiled in the archives. You don't find it in the treaty file. You go to it took me years to locate this and actually find it. But this is the Samoan side of the ratification of. So the way treaties work, you have two parties. They negotiate, then they sign, and then they send it back to each of their government to ratify, and then the monarch of each country or the head of state signs it, and then they exchange ratifications, and then the treaty is valid. So this is the Samoan ratification document, which of course, because it was signed in Samoa, it was done just like a few days later. The Hawaiian ratification took a few months because they had to send it back to Hawaii and then send it back. But this is the Hawaiian the Samoan ratification document. It's all in Samoan, but there's an English translation and a Hawaiian official English and official Hawaiian translation. And essentially, it says that Hawaii and Samoa agree to form a political confederacy, to have King Kalakaua as the head of both countries in a way, but Malietoa remains king of Samoa, but under some kind of overlordship of King Kalakaua. And the Hawaiian Kingdom would actually help. They would send some Hawaiian bureaucrats who would be experienced in running the government, because some Samoans at the time didn't have too many people who were experienced in this kind of Western-style government. So they sent somebody from the Hawaiian Ministry of Finance and Hawaiian policemen, just kind of technocrats from Honolulu who knew how to run a modern government to help the Samoans out, essentially. So that was part of the agreement. But then keep this all under a kind of Polynesian confederation of which Kalakaua would be the head. So that's essentially what this says. Signed here by Malietoa Ole Tupu o Samoa, Malietoa the king of Samoa. And also his secretary, William Coe, who is any of you is familiar with Queen Emma, not Queen Emma of here, but so-called Queen Emma of Samoa. That's her brother, Emma Coe, and that's another Hafakasi Samoan, American father, Samoan mother. And then you have all these, you have Le Mamea, who is the Ministry of Interior in Samoa, and then you have all these different chiefs from the different districts of Samoa that all signed. Either if many of them were literate, they signed their name, others were not, then they had an X and then somebody writing their name for them. So this is, in a way, the first success story of this Hawaiian policy, actually having Samoa sign a treaty of confederation with Hawaii. And now comes this beautiful Olelo no Eau in here. So I'm just kind of just put this together here to little patchwork here of images. But so this is a really interesting newspaper article, and it's going to be published in the new issue of Palapala, Journal of Hawaiian Language, the one that just the new Hawaiian Language Journal of UH, and I translated it and edited it, and it's going to be a little piece of mine in there. This year's issue probably comes out later, end of the year or so. And so essentially, in April 87, Honolulu resident W.L. Bishop, still haven't identified him. He is definitely not part of Charles Reed Bishop's family, and neither part of Sereno Bishop's family, like the evil bishops, none of those two. But he is, there were actually two other bishops who were British and American who were naturalized in the mid-19th century. So it's probably, I assume it's the half Hawaiian son of one of those, because his Hawaiian is so good, and he actually talks about, us dark-skinned people and whatever. So I'm sure he's part Hawaiian himself. And it's probably the son, I assume, of one of those two other bishop people that were naturalized. But anyway, he writes this guest editorial, and it's like, it's a wonderful piece of, if you want to if you want to read kind of a geopolitical analysis, like hardcore political science, and you want to read it in Hawaiian, then that's the thing to do. I mean, this is absolutely wonderful, and it's hard to because it's a long thing. I can't really read even the whole translation here; would take way too long. But essentially, he advocates for the Hawaiian Kingdom. Says like the Hawaiian Kingdom is a regional power now in the Pacific. Here's like he said, "Walilo oya Ikea la kekahi ona mana o kamwana pakipika." Right, Hawaiian Kingdom has now become one of the powers of the Pacific, and because of that, we should Hawaii should take an active leadership in the Pacific. But as the Olero Noyao says, it's a windy day. Once you fly up there, it's a windy day. You gotta face those. I mean, you might get yourself in trouble, but you got to be ready for that. So he advocates that Hawaii should not just have this ship here. Hawaii should actually go to England and buy at least 2 or 3 ironclad warships. It would be about $60,000 each at that time, which was considerable sum at that time. But Hawaii had a lot of sugar income. Hawaii had a high per capita income. I would say Hawaii was probably one of the 20 richest countries at the time. I would say it was definitely in the higher level in the high income level of countries, and it was small, of course, but it might have been a good way to do that, to follow his advice. And he was a little bit critical because he thought that Kalakaua and Gibson, for all they were doing, and again I don't want to be too harsh there, but neither did Bishop want to be too harsh, but he wanted to say, well, you got to do this a little bit. You should do this a little bit better because it's a little bit. I mean, some of this is kind of ill-coordinated, and there's these guys that are in Samoa, are they actually doing what they're promised to do? And so he was skeptical about whether it worked the way it did work out, but and there were some inconsistencies. But overall, he was, of course, very supportive, and if anything, he suggested that Hawaii should, be even stronger in this. Really assert itself, and again. Actually get itself a decent navy that could actually send real warships there with ironclad, the iron hulls and stuff. So anyway, this is just kind of just the wonderful. I mean, I keep reading it and reading it and reading it, and I have been working on polishing my translation for the publication. I mean, it's just such a wonderful piece, and in a way, it shows the potential of, Kamana Beamer, one of my friends and colleagues. He has this wonderful sentence in his book where he says the Hawaiian Kingdom was a vessel of potential. I mean, and this is one of these moments where you really see that, this vessel of potential. How much potential was there? But anyway, I don't want to get too much into philosophizing here about all kind of things. But I want to go back to our topic, namely So let's just finish up. Come back to the sour reality here. Now, what happened, of course, was then, which I call the beheading of Oceania. In June, July of that same year, 1887, they had what is usually called the bayonet coup. And again, the fact that bayonet coup happened in a way is evidence of that Bishop was right, that Hawaii should have invested even more in its own military, because these guys, these armed missionary descendants, took over and forced Kalakaua to sign this ridiculous constitution, and then this then led to the recall of this Hawaiian embassy from Samoa. They essentially said, we wouldn't do any of this Pan-Pacific stuff anymore. All Hawaii should do is get closer to the U.S. That's essentially what the guys were saying, were forcing Kalakaua to say, essentially. And then at the same time, once the Hawaiian warship was withdrawn, then the Germans immediately came with their warships and just took over Samoa, and they kidnapped Malietoa, took him hostage all the way to Germany, and eventually they tracked back, and then we went back and forth for another decade. But in 1900, the Germans actually did take over the western half of Samoa. And again, this is not a talk about the overthrow and the supposed annexation and all that. We have had other people in this series discuss that in more detail, so I just want to leave it here. But essentially, these were the beginnings of worse things to come. So the kind of forcing the end of Hawaii's Pan-Oceania policy was essentially the harboring of more worse things to come in the 1890s, which I don't want to talk about now. But now let's get to the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania, actually, which now now I have given you a context, what Hawaiian foreign policy was in the late 19th century during Kalakaua's time, how Hawaii related to the rest of the Pacific Islands. And now we can see like the context in which then Kalakaua created this order to really symbolize or epitomize, which is one of these fancy academic terms, I guess, this kind of policy. So we have the statutes of the order. They were published first in English in late '86, and then a few months later in Hawaiian. Kumukanawai o ka oihana kea ho'ohanohano ali'i o ka oku o Oceania. So that would be the Hawaiian term, right? Oihana kea. It's oihana, a kind of some kind of enterprise. Kea, the cross, right? Ho'ohanohano, to honor ali'i, right? I mean, that's how the term royal order was being rendered in Hawaiian. O ka hoku o Oceania, the Star of Oceania. And so essentially, some of this is kind of boring stuff, and I'm going to share. I'm going to read the whole thing. It's like a maybe 30-page booklet. It has, describes all the different rules of the order and how those things are. But I think the essential parts I summarize here. So the order is created as an order of honor to be awarded, and then quote, in recognition of services in advancing the good name and influence of Hawaii in the islands of Polynesia and other groups of the surrounding ocean, in order to promote harmonious cooperation among kindred people. So again, here we have this idea of, because Hawaiians are Polynesians and related to all of these other people, we should, that's why there's this Hawaiian sense of kuleana here, and the order should be given for anything that promotes this kind of harmony and unity there. Now what's interesting is that the way they define Oceania, because we often define Oceania as the islands in the Central Pacific, Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia. And now those guys, they went actually much further than that, because the definition of Oceania that is given here is so Oceania is the native communities. So remember, it's the first part is already interesting. It's a definition by peoples, not by region. So like all these white settlers in New Zealand, for example, they're not part of Oceania, right? So the native communities on the islands of the Pacific and Indian Ocean, not just Pacific, Indian as well, and on contiguous continents. I think what they essentially meant was what today we would call the Austronesian speakers, people who speak Austronesian languages, which would be all of Polynesia, all of what is Micronesia, most or much of what is Melanesia, and also what today would be Indonesia and Malaysia, these islands in Southeast Asia that are all speaking languages very closely related to those of the Central Pacific. And then all the way Madagascar, which is off the coast of East Africa, but which also speaks an Austronesian language. And some of them, even in Malagasy, they have words that are similar to those in Samoan and in Hawaiian and whatever. So I think that's essentially what King Kalakaua was hinting at here, that all these people who are of the related language group should be kind of united under this label of Oceania. Oops, where are we? Okay, now what's happening here? Okay, the insignia. So insignia is the fancy term by, if you're talking about royal orders, about these kind of metal things, yeah, these things that you wear. That's called insignia, right? So the insignia of the order were designed by this lady, Isabel Strong, who is the stepdaughter of the famous Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. And of course, a lot of you have seen, pretty much in any hotel in Waikiki, you see these pictures of Stevenson and King Kalakaua, right? I mean, it's one of the more well-known facts of Hawaiian history that Stevenson was very close to the royal family here in Hawaii. And not just Stevenson himself, but also Stevenson's extended family, because Stevenson didn't travel alone. He traveled always with a huge family appendix that came with him everywhere. And one of those was Isabel Strong. Now, she was an artist. She was actually American from California. One of these early examples of what you would call bohemians. Maybe today you would call them hippies even. I don't know, but definitely not part of this stern Victorian, the absolute opposite of let's say, Lauren Thurston's wife, yeah, like the absolute opposite of kind of, in terms of almost everything, right? I mean, you already see like the kind of dress, like, I mean, in the 1890s, for a lady to wear this kind of dress is kind of shows that you're not part of the, you don't give a about the Victorian upper class standards. I mean, right? This is so very, and then of course these were the kind of people who were really felt at home here in Hawaii and hanging out with the Hawaiians and in the royal court, right? And her husband, Joseph Strong, is the artist who did those two paintings here. G.D. Strong, Joseph Dwight Strong. And they were done by for Kalakaua's 50th birthday. Kalakaua essentially asked him he wants to have a view of how Honolulu looked when Kalakaua was born. So 50 years prior to that, 1836. Right, it's just small houses, most of them still halepili, a few Western style houses. Fort is still there, lots of people in outrigger canoes. And then a picture, so unfortunately, but later once we take off the screen, and then you guys can, if you stay along for a little bit, you can check that out too if you haven't seen it before. This one is then during Kalakaua's 50th birthday, like in 1883, when you have a lot of these modern buildings and all these big ships everywhere, and like, I mean, just showing how Honolulu has, I guess, progressed or grown in the 50 years of King Kalakaua's life. So anyway, so I just want to give you a context of who this lady was. And it's definitely a good artist, like again, a really advanced kind of this kind of Art Deco style, which is like for the 1880s. I mean, really early, I mean, really advanced for her for that time. I think many of her artwork. And so the design she did here is essentially the 5-pointed star. Interesting. Note the absence of any Christian symbolism. Like all these older orders have some kind of cross structure. This one doesn't. Also, the colors are interesting, green and red, like colors that are not very common in the royal orders of the time, because most of them were like kind of, rather had this kind of red and blue and like bright red and blue. Usually, most of these kind of Western countries had that in their flags too. So it's kind of interesting to choose like a very deliberately different color that's kind of makes it very distinct, very different from the other orders. Of course, like the structure here, so you have like the kind of like a leaf, like a palm leaf, right in here. These green parts. And then essentially the symbolism is here, you have the sea, and over the sea is this beacon. Yeah, that beacon radiates out, and you have these 6 stars. I'm not sure, unfortunately there's no really good description, like detailed description of this. Like, and I would love to see like a description by herself, like writing like 3 pages of why she chose all of these things, but unfortunately I haven't seen it. All I have is like a short description in this brochure, in these statues. But it says essentially, so again, the number 6, I don't know why it's 6 specifically, but it's just, I mean, the symbolism is clear. It's Hawaii is that beacon in the middle. That's the hope for all these other Pacific islands that, can kind of guide them in trying to remain independent and avert Western colonialism. Okay, now we get into the different 7 ranks of the order. So these orders, most orders had, in the 19th century, had several ranks, which the medieval ones didn't. Like the Order of the Garter has only 1 rank. It's you're a Knight of the Garter or you're not. But then later orders, like the Legion of Honor, for example, has like 7 degrees. And and most of the 19th century orders have these different degrees. And this is exactly how the Order of the Star of Oceania was set up. So you have the highest rank, which is the Grand Cross. The Grand Cross, you wear one of these things on your chest, right? It's chest star. And then you wear a big sash. And then you have another kind of thing hanging down here. So that's the Grand Cross, the highest rank. Second rank is the Grand Officer. You have a star like this, but it's a little bit smaller on your chest, but no sash. So that's the second rank. Third rank, Officer. You have one of these little stars from it that kind of hangs from this little hook, and then it's actually there's a ribbon that you wear around your neck. It's kind of like a necklet, like a lei in a way. And then so that's the Officer. Oh shoot, I forgot. There's one more rank here. I apologize here. So there's Grand Cross, Grand Officer. Sorry. So in between there is a Commander here. So this is the Commander, which has that one in the larger size, and then below the Commander is the Officer, who has the same kind of thing on a necklet but in smaller size. So that's the Officer. And then the lowest rank is that of Companion. So as a companion, you see this is like much simpler structure than this one. And this one is just on this little ribbon that you just put on your uniform or whatever, your jacket. So these are, and then there are also 2 more ranks, the first class medal and the second class medal. So these would be just kind of medals, like coins. That would be kind of, just little coins that you could put on your jacket. And these ones would be given out for just kind of military officers as part of their, in a way, like for certain years of service. So these ones would all be given for like special occasions, either because it's a special person or it's a foreign diplomat that you have or whatever, or somebody who did something exceptional for the kingdom. Whereas these first and second class medal would just be like, let's say, 10 years service in the Hawaiian Navy, then you would get first class. And then another 10 years or another 5 years of service you would get. So that's the purpose of this medal. Now, unfortunately, these medals, I've never seen them, and I'm not sure whether they were actually made physically. Because all I've seen is these other these other 5 degrees of rank. And so now we go through the recipients. Unfortunately, I have there's a little booklet that was published a few years, many decades ago. Sorry, just want to show you this. So there's a little booklet here that was published in the 1960s by Gordon Metcalf, Hawaiian Royal Orders. And that one is actually quite useful. It's not necessarily complete, because at that time, there was no internet, and this guy went through the archives and looked into all kind of things and compiled a lot of things, but there's still there's mistakes in there and omissions. But essentially, it lists for each of the Hawaiian Royal Orders, it lists all the recipients, everybody who got those. And again, it's not complete, but it's a good start. So we go after. So just show you, like, for each rank, I'll show you who the recipients were, and if I was able to identify them and have a picture, I have that here. So the Grand Cross, again, remember, this is the cross, and then the sash with the other little star here. That one was given out only once, and that was given to His Majesty Malietoa Laupepa, at that time King of Samoa, in 1887. Now, this is the same picture I pulled before, where he sits on that ship next to the Hawaiian ambassador. There's a little interesting detail here. What he wears here, anybody can see that. The outline of this cannot be that one, right? You see there would be much more kind of a starry kind of thing, whereas this one is kind of rectangular. So I looked at it, and I zoomed in on had the State Archives make like a huge copy for me, and then I was able to look into. So this is actually the star of the Grand Officer of the Royal Order of the Crown, which he never got by legally by documentation. So my suspicion is here what happened is because Bush, the Hawaiian ambassador, he was awarded the Grand Officer of the Order of the Crown. So because they were sitting for this photograph, and he had just been made Grand Cross of the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania, but these things were made in Paris. It takes a while to ship them first to Hawaii and then ship them to Samoa. So he probably wouldn't have gotten it till like a year later. So, but for this photo, this is the King of Samoa. He just got awarded the highest rank of this new Hawaiian Order. They couldn't just have him sit there without anything on his chest. So I guess Bush took off the one from his chest and put it on just so that they have a prop there to make the photo look nice. So that's the only way I can think how this could have happened. But anyway, so these are the funny little details that if you do like intense research, you find these kind of things, and they make you smile. How like in all of this very regulated, very structured kind of Victorian culture, you just do like simple things like that. You just break the rules because you want to, because you want to be nice. You don't want to have him on a photo without any medal. Right? I like that kind of simplicity of things. Anyway, so next rank, the Grand Officer. Was given out twice, and only twice. The first, Sidney Hoffnung, he was the Hawaiian Consul General in Sydney much later, not during St. Julian's time, but one of his successors, and also then Chargé d'Affaires, which is like the second rank after ambassador, a really high rank, like a kind of Hawaii's, like today you would call it Hawaii's ambassador in London. And he got it in 87. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of him. I don't know how he looks like. And then also in 87, Paul Neumann, and he is quite famous because he was a German Jew, actually Jewish German from Eastern Prussia. And he was Attorney General under King Kalakaua. And then he got that in 87 while he was Attorney General, but then he also later became the lawyer for Queen Liliuokalani, and he's the one who drafted the assignment of 93, that famous thing where she says, I hereby yield my authority under protest until such time as I am reinstated as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands, right? This famous statement. He helped her draft it as her legal advisor. And he also defended her when these crooks took her into this so-called military court in 95. He was there to try to help her and defend her. So he was one of those other great heroes Haole heroes of the kingdom. So he got that Grand Officer rank. Now, next rank, where are we? Commander. So there were a few people, Henry Armstrong, Hawaiian Consul General in London. I don't know who I don't have a picture of him. Now this one is quite interesting, Colonel James H. Boyd. He at that time was the Interior Department clerk and also captain of the Hawaiian ship Manu Okawai. I got the O and U mixed up here, excuse me. It's misspelling sometimes. That's the kind of stuff that the autocorrect doesn't catch because it doesn't catch Hawaiian words. That's why, sorry about that. So he is the Hawaiian captain who claimed he was sent up by Kalakaua earlier in 86 to go to all these northwestern Hawaiian islands and make sure that each of them is being claimed for the Hawaiian Kingdom. So he essentially helped Hawaii to kind of reassert its territorial sovereignty over the entire island chain. And so essentially for that he got knighted to be like the commander of the Royal Order of the Star of Oceania. He is also the older brother of I forgot his first name, but that Boyd who was in Italy together with Wilcox and then came back with Wilcox. That's the older brother of him. So that the Boyd family, I think it's the same as the current Hawaiian Boyd family. I think these are ancestors of that family as far as I know. And then also W.H. Cornwall, who was at that time a legislator, and he was later the Minister of Finance under Liliuokalani. He was part of this last cabinet together with Parker and Colburn and Peterson, the last cabinet that the Queen had before the Thurston and his gang did what they did. So he got that, and then the other ones, I just don't know. I mean, they're in this book, but I don't know who these people were. C.W. Mowitz, C.O. Nagayama, I assume a Japanese government official probably, because they were doing a lot of the negotiations about immigration and stuff. Count Axel Wachtmeister, a Swedish nobleman. Again, I don't know what his relationship was with Hawaii. And then these other two people, Hugh Madsen, and then probably a Frenchman, Magnac. I don't know if that's probably the family name, no first name given here. So again, I mean, this is, there's a lot of research, a lot of time a lot of research here that's left to be done, to identify all these people, who they were. And then one rank lower, the rank of officer. We have three people who got that rank. Major James W. Robertson. He was at that time the bookkeeper in the Chamberlain's office. And later he became, under Liliuokalani, he became Chamberlain himself. Chamberlain means the guy who runs the palace. So essentially predecessor of Kippen in a way. So, and then we had John Paul Kahalewai, who was captain of the Royal Household Guards. Again, I wasn't able to find a picture. I'm sure it exists among his descendants or in the archives. I just wasn't able to find it online. And then John Anna, one of the early Hawaiian Chinese businessmen. Like his father was from China, his mother from Hawaii. And he was the secretary of the Inter-Island Navigation Company at that time. So it's another thing that people don't realize, because there is often this idea that the kingdom was great, blah, 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 but the economy was all in the hands of howlers, right? How many people have heard that story, that kind of saying, right? Sure, there were a lot of howlers in business for sure, but there were also natives who were important business owners during the kingdom in the Inter-Island Steam Navigation Company, that's essentially that's what Matson is today or whatever. That's what Hawaiian Airlines is today. That's like the entire communication. If you want to go to Maui, you need to go onto one of those ships, and it's that guy who owned those ships. So, anyway, so that's he also because of his merits in being a successful native businessman and being friends with the royal family. I'm sure he got that one as well. Then the lowest rank companion. Some of those who get that rank, Edward Kamakau Lili. There should be no comma there or no dot, no period. Sorry, Edward Kamakau Lili Kalani. He is a Ali'i descendant, somewhat the distant relative of the Kalakaua dynasty, but over certain edges. And he was a legislator at that time and also secretary to Queen Liliuokalani. So he got the companion's rank. And then Isabel Strong, the designer of the order herself, because of having designed it. And actually for another thing too, because I read her memoirs, so she was a designer, but she was actually, because she was a woman, and at that time, this macho society, Victorian age, nobody suspected a woman to do something important. She was the one who helped smuggle notices between Gibson, Kalakaua, and other people during that bayonet coup, when you had these armed Honolulu rifles, these armed Howler missionary gangsters on the streets everywhere, and then they cut off communications, they cut all the telephone lines, like you do if you do a coup, and then nobody could communicate, and then she was passing like little written messages between King Kalakaua and Gibson and between some of Liliuokalani, all these friends. She was the one doing that. And so because of of course, this was, later under the bayonet, post-bayonet, these guys were in control, so Kalakaua couldn't say he gave her the order because she did that for him. But, she knew that it was not just because she was the designer, but also because she had done these important services for the king and for Gibson, actually just to save Gibson's life, essentially, because they want the bayonet people, they wanted to actually lynch Gibson. They wanted to put him like on a lantern pole someplace, so. She helped that. She saved him in a way. And then who else we have here? W.H. Grain Hulk. I don't know what name that is, but he was the editor of the Paradise of the Pacific magazine. The one that now is Honolulu magazine, which was founded under royal patronage in that time. So he got that. I don't know who Henry Hayman is. Henri de Varigny, he's interesting. He's a Frenchman. He's actually the son of a Frenchman, Charles de Varigny, who was previously Hawaiian Minister of Finance and then of Foreign Affairs under Kamehameha V. And then he went back to France. And somehow his son visited later to Hawaii or whatever, I don't know. So I don't know the story behind it, but that's his. And then these are all French Navy officers. Certain Denis B. de Azy, H. Suyet, S.A. Balmy, and H. Zagrif. So again, it's probably a visiting French Navy ship, and each of them got a little medal probably during that time. And the other people, J.O. Taylor, Stewart, I don't know who they were. And then Mrs. Corwin, the second, only two women who got it, like Isabel and this lady. So, mahalo for your interest. I hope you learned some interesting stories today, and maybe it'll inspire some of you to research by yourself. There's literally millions of documents of pages all over the place about the Hawaiian Kingdom that have not really been touched. So anybody who wants to pick up and maybe find out who all these other people were who got the order, or welcome to do so. Here's my email, some of the sources that that's important scholarship. Always reveal your sources, right? So I didn't see some other materials I used, besides, of course, original documents in the archives. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Over the years, I've certainly noticed you. And I was constantly questioning, who's that Haole guy there? What's he all about? Do you feel it's truly been worth your time, all the years that I've seen you? I'm not sure about the perspective of whether how important this really is. I'm not sure, yeah? So I found it quite interesting to pay attention to you, and I knew that you were doing something, but is there anyone else that has done anything to this extent, such as you have?
I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who have done similar research. I mean, in this room is, I mean, definitely Dr. Ron Williams, who sits in this room here. I mean, I think he has done probably more than me about, you know, researching details about, you know, kingdom history, all of the people who got arrested in '95. I mean, he's done a lot of research, and I'm sure, I mean, there are other historians too. I mean, Noinoi Silva, I mean, before me, you know, like people and older generations, Noinoi Silva has done a lot of research, Puakea Nogelmeier, Keanu Sai. I mean, there are many people. I don't think I'm the nowhere near the only or the biggest researcher about this topic.
No, I think what I like about your, I was wondering how you figure yourself out there, because you seem to be completely unbiased. As a European, how do you step aside and not be so judgmental from the European point of view of interpreting the history as it occurs? How are you able to be so, I guess you're trying to be as objective as you can? That's what I'm amazed by hearing you.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I just think that, I mean, I guess, it's a very important question, but it's also a hard question to answer. I think, I mean, I'm just trying to, I mean, I definitely, if I see all of this and I see what happened in Hawaii both back then and also today, you know, I'm just trying to you know, sympathize with what's right, what's pono, I guess, to use a Hawaiian term. I mean, I just think that if, you know, I mean, you say, yeah, I'm European. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, why don't, for example, like, let's make it a practical example here. Why don't I sympathize with the Germans who were trying to take over Samoa during that time, who the Kaimilo was fighting against? Well, because I think that this was wrong, that what Germany was doing at the time. I mean, they did, of course, much worse things in the 20th century, as we all know. But I mean, this was also part of where Germany was wrong. And I totally, I mean, you know, if there were things that were obviously wrong, that were hava, that were hurting other people, then I don't agree with it, and then I sympathize with, try to write history from the point of view of those whose voice hasn't really been heard and who have been harmed, you know, afterwards or during that time, and especially here in Hawaii, where we have, you know, these, I mean, because of these bad things that happened essentially after this time, you know, what I just alluded to, and you have so many people today suffering in Hawaii, mainly Native Hawaiians, also others. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I think it's a matter of, you know, just doing the right thing. Sure.
Yeah, I was wondering, as you did your research, what was the size of the military, and was it also the, would you say, and the population at that time? But we're talking about the military of the Hawaiian people. So what was their strength in terms of the naval and the marine and the population then?
You're talking about Hawaii, right? The Hawaiian Navy?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, there's actually somebody else who has written more about it, about the Hawaiian military. There's this Canadian historian, I forgot his name, he wrote a whole book on the Hawaiian military, and that's really, I mean, so what I'm saying here is that I'm essentially quoting his book. The Hawaiian military has essentially, during most of the 19th century, has dramatically decreased. During King Kamehameha the first time, Kamehameha the first army that he conquered the other islands with was bigger than George Washington's army was in the American War of Independence. So you see, like, Hawaii had a huge military in the ancient times, or even in the early modern times. But throughout the 19th century, when you had the disease problem and people were dying, I think many people, the government was worried about other things than military, and then they kind of reduced the military really drastically. And the more of these kind of veterans of Kamehameha's wars, when they passed away slowly in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so it became less and less. And then I think during that time, 1880s, it went kind of up and down, but during Liliuokalani's time, right before the overthrow, they had about, I think, about 250 military, like infantry members here. Navy was not as strong because they essentially had this one ship, the Kaimiloa. Maybe about 100 people or so altogether in the Navy. So it was a very small military, definitely. Now, of course, the overall population of Hawaii was also much smaller than it is today. There was less than 100,000. Probably there was about 40,000 indigenous native Hawaiians, maybe about half or so, 20 or 30,000 more who were non-native citizens, I think, and then there were quite a few other foreigners, Chinese. So I don't know the exact. I have to look up the statistics. I don't want to say wrong things here, but it was definitely I think less than 100,000 altogether living in Hawaii at that time. So yeah, no, I mean the military was definitely rather small, and I mean it was in a way not a military that they could actually use to actively fend off a foreign invasion with big warships. But that's exactly why they did so much diplomacy. That's why they were trying to make treaties with everybody, having diplomatic relationships with everybody. But I mean, in this specific context, it was somewhat different because, like, if, for example, in Samoa, I mean, there was a moment when the Kaimiloa was the biggest warship in Samoa because nobody else had a warship there, you know. So, in a way, in these small Pacific islands, you could, I mean, this Hawaiian Navy presence, you know, made a difference there because, you know, they were even smaller islands than Hawaii was, you know. So, I hope that answers your question.
What flag was that ship flying?
That's very interesting. That ship was flying a Hawaiian naval flag, not the national flag, but a special, hard to see here, but I have a much bigger picture here. I have a much better picture. So it had actually it has the Union Jack in the corner, just like the Hawaiian national flag. But then it had in this field here, it had a thing crossed Pulo'ulo'u and the Kahili, kind of in a coat of arms. Like it was a specific crest that was created as the Hawaiian naval crest, different from their regular coat of arms. So it is there was a special Hawaiian naval flag that was created.
Is there anywhere we can find a better picture of that flag?
Yes, it's there's a much bigger resolution of this picture is in this Hawaii State Archive. They have a really nice one that's really, so you can actually see all the details in black and white. And then there are some people who have, I'm not sure exactly who, but some, I guess, amateur historians have worked on that and actually made a color version of it. So if you Google Hawaiian naval flag online, you might actually find it. And I think that's based on descriptions of what colors they were using. So I think that looks pretty accurate. So you just try to find it online, and then of course go to the archives and look at the original. Of the picture.
Mahalo, Lorenz. Mahalo, Lorenz, for such it was a really informative talk. One of the things I love about your research is how prolific it is, but also you bring stuff together into a kind of coherent theory that makes sense. So mahalo. Kind of a two-part question. You said the mission statement of the order was about, you know, the Federation and so forth. Can you say something about the relationship of that order to the other orders? Was it given out in the same way, you know, for the same reason, that kind of thing? And also, like, what about year-wise? Did it end after the kind of the failure of this mission, or did they keep giving that Star of Oceania out after that?
It was a little bit too much at one time. What exactly? Sorry, no, I mean, yeah.
Well, first of all, it seemed like the order was meant to fortify this federation.
Yes,
Federation. So when that started to fall apart, did they continue to give the order out after that?
Yes, they did. I mean, as you see, like some of these, so, you know, 87 was the bayonet coup, right? Which in mid-87, so which then they recalled the mission to Samoa, and then they essentially Hawaiian active foreign policy in the Pacific ended from July 87 onwards. There was no other mission to any Pacific island. Now, But I think there are two things that I could describe that happened. So one thing is that the order itself was still being given to people who were, loyal to the Hawaiian government. So for example, you have some of these dates here, right? Like William Cornell got this one in 1890, which is much later than that. See, there's like some of these all 1890. Even when John Anna was given it in 88, right? These guys all got it in 88, again after the. So King Kalakaua still gave it to people even after the real mission purpose of it was no longer there, but he still gave it to like domestically to people who, you see 89, there's all these dates. So that was still given. Now the second question is the.
So like in relation, so why would he give that one out instead of the Order of Kalakaua? Was it lesser or greater, or was it just?
Well, it was also because of the rank system, because you had this like. Once you create a new royal order, it goes into this international rank system, and then it's a very intricate system. So you have, for example, you can like really grade them in much. So let's say the officer of the Order of Kamehameha is probably one notch higher than the officer of the than the commander of the Star of Oceania, and that way you can, because you have this, and then you get whatever, you get the Grand Commander of the Order of whatever Russia so and so, and then you have to let's say in France you get like somebody got a certain degree of the Legion of Honor, and then he was probably somebody in the government got the Legion of Honor, a certain rank of it, and then they looked up in this handbook and say, oh, okay, well the equivalent of this rank in our Hawaiian ranking system is whatever the companion of the Star of Oceania, and then what I mean. So in that sense. Because once the order was created, it was part of the international rank system. That might be one of the reasons. Because you're right. I mean, none of these post 87 awardees seem to have had anything to do specifically with a pan-Pacific policy. That is true. Now, the second, just to finish up, in terms of pan-Oceania policy, it is very interesting. I think in a way, I think the kingdom after the overthrow went at least for some time underground, as long as the people were still alive. There was a lot of kind of underground activity in a way, and there was actually part of this underground kingdom diplomacy was that in 1907, John Tamatoa Baker, the one who actually posed as a model for the King Kamehameha statue, he was the former governor of Hawaii Island. He went on a trip to visit all these Pacific islands and visit all these chiefs there, and like everybody that Kalakaua had tried to communicate at that time. So Kealani Cook has written a lot about this, and I mean it's just my interpretation is that this is the Hawaiian underground diplomacy trying to continue that in 1907, even though the American occupation had essentially made this not visible on the surface anymore. But so yeah, there were definitely attempts to continue this in various ways. And okay, sure.
You got it. So my question is whether or not. So it sounds like the examples that you give are of people who have received the royal orders as people who are loyalists and benefited the kingdom and the. Ali'i in some way. Were there people who received the royal orders who betrayed their country?
Now with this one, I am not really aware because I've seen these. I mean, these are either people who, well, they were foreigners who were just visiting here and then leaving again. They probably didn't do anything, neither good nor bad really. But then I'm not aware of any of these in this list to have later become part of the Republic and the PGs and whatever. But of course, I could be wrong because some of these names I don't know. With some of the other orders, definitely. I mean, I know that. I mean, the Judd family, Charles Judd, and his brother, the other Judd, who was Chief Justice. I mean, they were traitors, and then they got royal orders before, while they were still part of the government. Charles Reed Bishop got several higher-ranking orders. He was a traitor. He sided with the PGs. So I mean, there were people in. Sure, there were traitors who. I mean, there were people who got this, king assuming, or the king or queen assuming them to be loyal, and then they gave them this order, and then later they sure, it did happen.
Okay.
In your research, have you found comparable information on the designs of the other orders, and specifically that the majority of them were actually made in Paris by the same person who made the orders for the English crown, the Italian crown, it was basically the same one?
I have not really researched that in detail, but I just from kind of circumstantial evidence, I know that it was, they were all made by this. There was I think there were only 2 or 3 manufacturers in the whole world who were making these royal orders at that time. So definitely the same manufacturer made a lot of other orders, and and many of them were just by the way they're designed there, especially the older. I mean, this one really has, I think, really something of its own with that 5-star, whatever. But all of these 4 others were definitely very much. They were very similar in shape to kind of many other European orders, and they were made by the same company as those. That's true. Now about the specific design, I have only researched specifically how she designed this one. Who actually did the designs for the other ones, I have not researched that, so I cannot answer that question.
Thank you, Lorenz, for your informative presentation. I would like to go back to the insignia. Maybe I missed it, but what is the symbol under that? Looks like kind of a dagger, or I don't know exactly.
Oh, you mean the symbol of the
Yes. What's just under the?
Let's go. Let me just go back to the one where it has the whole thing really big. This one?
Yes, there is this symbol here. Yes. No, just under.
Oh, in the bottom? This?
Yes.
This? That's, I'm not sure. It's not mentioned in the description that I have. It's not mentioned. I mean, it's obviously there, but what exactly it symbolizes, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But thank you for your attention to detail. That's, I will definitely think about this more now.
May I ask how you became interested in this topic, and when you traveled to Europe, how you were able to be affiliated with these museums or like these archival locations, and how you found this information?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a long story how I got involved with this. I mean, I was one of these kids who was just not just most of the time at home reading and whatever and doing like my own little thing. And then eventually I got into Pacific Islands. I was just reading books about that, and that got me. So ever since my teenage years, I was kind of, while living in Germany, I was just, and I got more and more interested in it. And it was just like not a, eventually it became kind of a passion, and I wanted, and then I decided I wanted to study it and seriously. And then I went to University of Hawaii to study here and got my master's in Pacific Studies and which my PhD eventually. So yeah, it's a teenage passion that developed into a kind of lifelong commitment. I must say, and then because of that, I mean, and then I started off being kind of more like interested in like current activism, and I became really close to Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell here. He was like one of my really kind of personal persons of confidence. I spent, I don't know, like many hours with him, and he's really the one who got me interested in like Hawaii and in Hawaiian issues in general. And I did some other have some similar close connections to kind of pro-independence movements in other Pacific islands, in Tahiti especially, as well. And but then over the years I have met a lot of people who are doing this type of archival research, trying to what's the term? I mean, to really resurrect the kingdom and it's everything that happened there. And so, and then I just started to kind of slowly kind of swing into that direction of doing more like historical research. And because I'm going, my family is, I mean, my father is in Germany and other relatives, so I, come back and visit. And usually then because I have become aware of all these connections, and usually if I visit my parents, I also go to one of these archives in one of the neighboring European countries, and then every time I find like an amazing amount of things there. So I mean, it's just a little story, but I hope that answers your question.
All right, folks, we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for what you're sharing with us. Sure. I notice there's a trend or pattern that I'm observing with all the different talks that we're having. And in particular, I always notice there's almost a spiritual significance for us to learn about the certain subjects at a given time. Do you see that the Federation is a trend, maybe for Hawaii to start focusing towards, where we would be, say, a UN of Aboriginal peoples? And because it doesn't seem like the Aboriginal peoples are heard as a single voice. They're heard as a secondary voice through the filters of Western mindsets and protocols. So do you think that's why maybe this is rising to the surface, and for us to start seeing that there's a future for Oceania, for Polynesia to unite and to be a voice, a single voice on the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, there's a lot of things going on now in other parts of the Pacific, and it's so unfortunate because of this whole this Americanization of Hawaii. There's not as much. Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people here in Hawaii too who are engaged in that. I mean, don't want to disparage anything, but in some of the other southern islands of the Pacific, there's a lot going on in that same sense of trying to get out of these kind of Western patterns of thinking, and trying to, I mean, Epeli Hau'ofa, a famous Tongan anthropologist, he wrote this essay, Our Sea of Islands, maybe 20 years ago. And I mean, now you have this whole idea there were several conferences already in Fiji, for example. One of them I attended, where they are now talking about a green and blue economies instead of economic development in the Western sense. So I mean, there's a lot of I think these kind of shifts going on in that way. And if you think about it that way, that what I'm seeing is that what some of these ideas in late 19th century Hawaii, they were in a way precursors to that. And of course, at that time also, Victorian culture certainly had certain strictures of kind of Western culture, kind of strictures that were harder to break out of, which in a way today is maybe the world in general is more open to explore other things. Depends on how you see that, but yeah, no, I definitely would say that's some of this kind of potential that was developed in the late 19th century in Hawaii is definitely useful, I think, for movements today to strengthen kind of indigenous identity in the Pacific in general. So, hope that answers the question.
All right, folks. I want to say one more mahalo to Dr.
Oh,
Gonschor
sure.
for joining us tonight.